Hello everyone, I'm Georgia and this is The Sound of Georgia. And today I'm going to be talking about one of the biggest things about The Sound of Music, its historical inaccuracies. One of the biggest things that comes up when people talk about The Sound of Music is the criticism that it's not historically accurate. And they're right, it's not by a long shot. So today I'm just going to run down a few things that it got wrong and see whether there were any other adaptations that got closer. There are other adaptations, guys. Said other adaptations I will be considering in this video is Die Trapp Family. I have no idea if that's how you say it. I don't speak German, but it literally translates to The Trapp Family. And it was made in 1956 as the first adaptation of this story. The Trapp Family story, which came out in 1993. Don't ask me to say it in Japanese. I won't be able to do it. It's this. And The Von Trapp Family, A Life of Music, which came out in 2015. This one was actually based on Agatha Von Trapp's memoir, Stories Before and After the Sound of Music. And though it tells a different story for the most part, because it's based on a different memoir, that story that is in all the others is there in the background. So, where should we start? Come on, you all know the answer, let's just get into it. Maria was actually a postulant at Nonnberg Abbey when this whole thing started. But in addition to being a nun in training, she also had a teaching degree and taught children at the Abbey. See in Die Trapp Family, she's teaching a class of children, as well as in the first few episodes of the Trapp Family story anime. Her being a teacher is important because in reality she wasn't sent as the governess, she was sent to be a tutor for one of the children. The anime does this as well. In Die Trapp Family she is sent as the governess, but in the anime she is there as a tutor for little Maria. Little Maria couldn't walk to school with her siblings, and so she needed somebody to teach her her lessons at home. Which brings us to the children. As you're probably aware, there is no child in The Sound of Music named Maria. There was also no Liesel, no Gretel, and none of the other ones in between. All the names were changed. In reality, their names were Rupert, Agatha, Maria, Werner, Hedwig, Johanna, and Martina. But the other adaptations have inaccuracies with this as well. Not as big inaccuracies as Sound of Music, but inaccuracies nonetheless. In Die Trapp Family, it seems all good until we get to the second youngest child, who instead of being Johanna is Rosemary. The anime gets closer in a way. The names are all correct, but they're not in the right order. Rupert's fine, he's the oldest as he really was, but the second oldest, the oldest girl, is Hedwig when she was Agatha. Maria and Werner are in the correct spots. Johanna's moved up one because Hedwig's number 2 instead of number 5. And Martina's moved up another one, being number 6 instead of 7, and they've dropped Agatha on the end as the toddler. Life of Music is actually a little hard to tell. The time compression on Life of Music is very good, it's almost non-existent, and we'll get to the time compression in a minute. And because of that we see Maria's first 2 children of her own, Rosemary and Eleanor. But neither of them are addressed by name. And the only 2 of the original 7 that are mentioned by name are Rupert and Agatha. But from what I could tell on IMDb, even though they weren't addressed, all the names are correct. But because so few are mentioned by name, it's hard to tell whether they are in the correct order. But because Rosemary and Eleanor are included, I'm going to say they got everything right and are the adaptation closest to the reality with the children. So, as I mentioned, time compression. The Von Trapp family's need to escape came after the Anschluss, which occurred in March of 1938. However, Maria arrived 12 years before that, in 1926, and married the captain a year later in 1927. So, in the interim of those two events, there's a decade or so. Sound of Music obviously does away with this entirely. The entire film takes place within a year. Life of Music gets this down pretty well. In reality, Agatha was 13 when Maria arrived. In the movie, she's 16, but from scenes where she visits her mother's grave, or is out around Salzburg with her fictional boyfriend, and the year is on a sign in the background, or when her father tells her that she can make her own decisions because she is 24. It's clear that she was born in 1913, which was when she actually was born, and so that means a time compression of only 3 years. Only 3 years were cut out in Life of Music. Good job then, they get the closest. The Trapp family and the anime don't do this. They're closer to the reality than Sound of Music is, but they're much closer to the Sound of Music than they are to Life of Music or the reality. Both of those adaptations seem to take place over a span of 18 months, roughly, give or take. It seems that she arrived in 1936 rather than 1926, and obviously the escape is still the same in 1938. That's the thing, we always have to keep the escape to the right year. So now that we've established that there are 10 or so years between when they got married and when they escaped, let's talk about the marriage. Maria was, as she puts it in her memoirs, on loan from the Abbey. I mean, she's obviously on loan in Sound of Music for all intents and purposes. But in the Trapp family and the Trapp family story, the fact that she's on loan is very important as to whether she can marry him. In both of these adaptations, she tells the captain that she has to go to the Abbey and get their okay or opinion on whether she should marry him, whether they think that's what God wants her to do. Obviously, we know the ending. That is what God wants her to do. But she needs permission from the Abbey. In Sound of Music, it's more follow your heart. If you love him, that's okay. Go and be with him. And this brings us to the other inaccuracy in Sound of Music. She wasn't in love with him. The nuns told her she had to marry the captain, and she was not happy about it. And she said in her memoirs that she did it for the children. She married the children in a way rather than marrying him. During their marriage, she did end up falling in love with him. She wasn't at the beginning. This is a little harder to pinpoint in the other adaptations. Having absolutely no desire to marry somebody whatsoever probably isn't really good for a story, but none of these are meant to be documentaries. In Life of Music, it indicates that they fell in love pre-marriage. The German film and the anime got closer to the truth than Sound of Music or Life of Music did, but I wouldn't say either of them are exactly the truth, and honestly, I wouldn't say exactly how. In the Trapp family, she seems happier when she arrives back home than she probably should have been. I'd say the anime gets the closest, where she runs into his arms and just cries. But therein lies the difference. She runs into his arms. In the memoir, he was standing right there at the door, and she says she basically fell into his arms and cried. Going back to the time gap between the wedding and the escape, there were a few things that happened, and I've touched on that with the children. Maria had 2 daughters of her own with Georg, and obviously this appears in Life of Music, where we see them. There's a baby in the scene right after the wedding in the Trapp family, but as far as I can gather, it's a boy. And obviously with the time being compressed to 18 months, that leaves very little if no room for 2 children to come along. The anime does something similar. We see she's pregnant towards the end of the series, but we don't ever see the baby, except for one still shot at the very, very end of the last episode. Obviously means she's pregnant during the escape, which she was. The other thing the family went through in those 12 years was bankruptcy. The captain brought his entire fortune from a bank in, I think it was England, to one in Austria, and that went under, and they lost everything. This is explored in the Trap Family and the anime. It's all but mentioned in Life of Music. Sound of Music skips over this entirely, and again I think it's because, well, they compressed the time so much. Though they did originally want to end the musical in Ellis Island. We'll get back to them. They let some of the staff go, as they do in Life of Music, but they also take in boarders and turn the villa into a boarding house. And this is important because it's a very big element in the singing group and the formation of the singing group. One of the people who boarded at the villa was Father Franz Wasner, who did mass for them in their chapel that they'd set up. We see him in both the anime and the German film, and he ends up as the conductor and manager for the singing group. And he eventually travelled to America with them. Again, both of the mentioned adaptations do this. Life of Music does away with him entirely. He's not there at all. And obviously in Sound of Music we have Max, who's there because he thinks it will make them money. And honestly, the singing group is a plot device in Sound of Music. It's so they can get out of there. It's not something they make their living off. Speaking of the singing group, the captain was very, very unhappy about this. Entertaining was something that aristocrats did not do. You could beg on the street, but singing was not done. So he didn't actually ever sing with them at all. He became their roadie, but he never actually joined the singing group. The Trap Family is the only adaptation that follows this through. Obviously in Sound of Music there's Edelweiss, which is one of the biggest moments in the show. In the other adaptations, he doesn't sing with them at the beginning, but he eventually joins them. Talking more about Georg, one of the things the Von Trapp family really were upset about after The Sound of Music came out was the way the captain was represented. He was much softer and kinder and nothing like what we see in the story, though he did have a whistle. And they all had signals. He is much softer in all the adaptations. I don't know how close that gets to reality, but he's definitely not as commanding as he is in The Sound of Music. Now, finally, let's talk about the escape. Because that's another thing people seem to call out a lot. No, they did not go over the mountains. Here is a map of Austria. Here is where Salzburg is. What's next door? Eagle's Nest. You can see where they filmed the last scene from Eagle's Nest. They would have ended up in Germany if they had gone the way Rogers and Hammerstein suggested. We don't really see what happens in any of the other versions as per the escape. In Life of Music we see them running out of the house. In the Trap Family we see them going out for a walk in the mountains. And then on Ellis Island, because they did end up there. Not quite as that movie suggests, but they did end up there at one point. But we don't find out whether they did go over the mountains. We just know that was their cover. In the anime they go to Innsbruck, I think, and then stop at a friend's house before catching a train out. That's the closest. They just walked to the train station, which was very close to the house. So, Sound of Music is obviously the very wrong one in that situation. And that's it. They're all the historical inaccuracies I'm going to talk about in the video. The Trapp Family and the Trapp Family Story anime are both available to watch on YouTube. I'll leave links to them in the down below. Let me know in the comments if you feel like I missed anything or you wanted me to talk about something more than I did. Also, let me know what your least favourite historical inaccuracy is, or the one that bugs you. Personally, the one that bugs me is every website ever that says there were actually 10 children. Yes, there were, but the way they present it makes it seem like there were 10 when she arrived. Feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my new video. So long, farewell!